Welcome to the Writing with Purpose podcast, inspiring journalists, writers, readers and nature lovers to embrace creativity and nature connection for positive well-being. I'm your host, Anna Woolliscroft. Join me for honest conversations with people who use writing, journaling and time in nature to find clarity, process life's experiences and live a more fulfilling life. Whether you're a seasoned writer, a curious beginner, or simply someone seeking a deeper connection to life, this podcast is for you. It's wonderful to have you here today. In today's episode, I'm talking with Evie Lindemann, an art therapist, author, and someone who has spent her life exploring what happens when image and word come together in the service of healing. Evie's journey has taken her from Afghanistan to the grief rooms of emergency wards and from working with combat veterans to sitting quietly with her own losses. What we explore in this conversation is how creativity in all its forms can carry us through the things that words alone cannot reach. I hope you find something here that sits with you. In this episode, I'm joined by Evie Lindemann, an art therapist, marriage and family therapist, and an author who bridges creative expression with depth psychology and end-of-life care. Evie's work spans clinical practice, teaching and humanitarian projects, helping people navigate grief, trauma and life transitions through visual journaling and expressive arts. Her unique approach invites us to explore what images can reveal that words alone might miss. From her early years in Afghanistan as a language teacher and illustrator to her current work supporting communities affected by hardship, Evie's journey demonstrates how creativity becomes medicine for both maker and witness. Welcome to the podcast, Evie.
Thank you so much, Anna. I'm really happy to be here today.
Yeah, I'm very excited. We've talked for about 20 minutes, haven't we, before hitting record on this?
We warmed up to the task.
We certainly did. So I'm hoping that we're going to cover some of what we've talked about already. But let's jump in first and do some quick fire round questions. So I would love to know what the last book you read was and why you were drawn to it.
Well, this is going to reveal one of my obsessions, but I'll go ahead and do that. You know, I've taught grief and loss courses and workshops for many, many years, and I've always had a fascination with Holocaust literature. So for the last month, I have immersed myself. It's very cold outside here, by the way, in Western North Carolina. So one of my main tasks, other than the everyday things I need to do, is just like to stay warm. So I've been building a little nest on my sofa with layers of blankets and a book. And I just finished one called The Light of Days: Women's Resistance Fighters in the Ghettos by Judy Battalion. And it's a very, very detailed description of the number of women who worked basically behind the scenes and sometimes leading groups of the resistance against the Nazis in World War II. So they did all kinds of things. They were couriers, they wore, I'm going to call them masquerades. They dressed up like peasant women, or sometimes they looked like a guy with heavy boots on. And they just had a kind of determination and a will that this work they were doing really, really mattered, even if it meant their doom. And so many, many people are described, many women are described in this, including the episodes that they ventured on, including the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. So that material interests me because I think in the heart of violence and war and cruelty, there are these pockets of incredible courage and love and sacrifice. And these women did it. And depending on how the history is written, it's often the men who are lifted up and they're the heroes because they've got big, tall bodies and they're physically strong. But that's not actually true. And this book kind of trues the history some and follows those who survived. There were many who did not, but they organized like uprisings. They organized digging tunnels through the camps and helping people to escape, living in the forest and the woods for weeks on end, surviving and then leading other people. So I think we need stories of strength and courage. And I'm always interested in women's stories because I don't think enough of them have been told.
Yeah, it's fascinating reading from history and those untold
Yes.
stories and seeing a different perspective. Than you're absolutely right, how the media represents it or how the majority of resources we have. But it goes to show that determination and resilience, but also I think women in particular, we often put other people first, and that's from what you
Yeah.
just explained there is a prime example of showing how they came together and
Mhm.
they grouped together and did something for the greater good and collectively rather than just
That's,
themselves.
it's also of interest to me because on my sojourn that took me 2 years to travel overland to India, I spent 6 months on a kibbutz in the Jordan Valley, um, right on the Jordanian border. And so this kibbutz, and I was not raised Jewish, but I feel a kinship. I was raised Roman Catholic for 18 years. And they had bomb shelters, and occasionally the kibbutz would get shelled, the buildings would
Mm,
shake. Somebody standing on the border might step on a mine. And so there were occasions of many of these were Eastern European Jews who happened to escape, right, from Poland, from
mm,
Germany, from all these different parts of Eastern Europe. And they developed these collective farms called kibbutzim. And that was, that was the work that I did. I studied Hebrew. I can't remember much anymore. But then I harvested eggplant. I climbed into citrus trees to clip tangerines and oranges, and I worked in the bakery. I did all kinds of things during that time. But I really, this book that I recently read helped me to understand how my experience on a kibbutz fit into this idea that many Eastern European Jews had of escaping to Israel and
mm.
starting brand new all over in a new country. It was like an inspiration for them. Many
Yeah.
didn't make it, but many of them did. And so yesterday was International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And so many of those people ended up doing walks, taking their children and their grandchildren with them. And you don't have to be Jewish to appreciate that a story of courage matters. And
Mm,
I think we have to keep, not to tell the stories to create trauma for people or bad feelings, but to remember what it takes to survive. And
yeah.
that when we stick together, we can manage.
Yeah, and we can take inspiration from that. Whoever
Yeah,
story it is, whatever background they have, cultural beliefs, religious beliefs, we can still,
exactly.
they are still those stories of humanity that we can take
That's
and encouragement from.
I hope that
Yeah.
explains why I chose that book. I just finished it 2 nights ago.
Yeah, no, it did. And I loved how you explained that you were building this little den with all of the blankets, and the book was a big part of that.
Simultaneously with that, I love paradox and contrast. I was also reading a famous English book, a children's author, Kenneth Graham, The Wind in the Willows.
Yes,
And
classic.
it is what a wonderful tale of these various characters. And they live on a riverbank and things happen and there's scary things, but they figure it out. Each character has to express itself.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're here to do in the world. How do we express ourselves and find harmony?
Mm, yeah.
But anyway, it's a delight. It's such a delightful book. And the illustrations are absolutely amazing. They create these beautiful, like underground homes for mole and, badger. There's always a fire crackling in the fireplace and cozy chairs by it. And a wonderful array of food on a table. And I have looked at those images often in these cold weeks to feel my own nesting inside.
Mm.
So it's beautiful to go back to. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right. Children's books are great at the illustration. You could almost read the story through the illustrations
Yes,
alone
that's
without
right.
necessarily the
Yeah.
words. And that's something we can come to now, really, because your focus is around that sort of art and illustration, isn't it? You
Mhm.
became a board certified art therapist, as well as a licensed marriage and family therapist. So what was it your travels that led you down that path? Can you explain a little bit about what led you to the visual, the art side of your work?
Yeah. Let's see. So I grew up in a family in California. I'm a fifth generation Californian. My oldest sister, whom I greatly admired, was very artistic. She became a fine arts photographer and a children's storyteller and started a summer camp in Southern California, all completely around creativity for kids.
Mm.
And we had a very natural kinship with each other. We also had the good fortune. There were five of us in my family, and my parents hired this woman. In those days, we called the person a housekeeper. She was so far from that. She was so far from being a nanny. Just imagine Mary Poppins in the flesh on
Yeah.
the ground. And her name was Gladys. And she was an amazing storyteller. She could whip out a story like her imagination just flowed every day. She was an oil painter. She loved painting imagery of Chinese figures with elaborate costumes and robes. We would have parties, and she taught us how to make taffy and divinity, and everything she touched had creativity in it. And I think her inspiration and watching how she did all these various things just without any effort
Mm.
became a big inspiration to me.
Yeah. How long were you with her?
She lived with us. And she had a home in San Francisco, and she had a tailoring business. So she was a fine seamstress doing suits and elaborate women's clothing. And she sewed for us. I mean, amazing dresses and hats and all kinds of things. I think I was probably about 3 when she came, and I was about 13 when
Mm.
she left. So a long stretch of time. And my
Yeah.
parents would often travel, they'd be away. So it was, kind of like, oh, this will be really fun now. She'd say, invite your friends, we'll have a party. She'd play music, we'd make candy and dance and talk and laugh. And,
Yeah.
she was a freedom urger.
That a freedom urcher. It sounds as though, yeah, she could turn her hand to absolutely everything and what a role model. So,
Yeah, she was amazing. I mean, the other part of becoming a therapist had to do with the family tragedy. So my father's suicide when I was in college shattered me
mm,
utterly. And I was studying the arts then. I was at the University of California, Berkeley at the time. And after my father's death and I finished college, my mother invited me to go to Europe with her. So we went to Europe, and I think my life was in a state where I was willing to throw it all in to figure out, is there something that has meaning in life or is there
mm,
no meaning in life? And so that took me on my 2-year odyssey across Europe and into Asia, a stop in Israel for half a year, a change of passports in Cyprus because we couldn't travel through Muslim countries with an Israeli stamp in our passport. Anyway, and then in Afghanistan, I got a job, my first art job out of college, I would say, illustrating children's stories for a literacy project that was funded by the Department of Education of Afghanistan and Columbia University. So it had collaborators from Afghanistan, like, the educators, and a team from Columbia. And they hired me because they were concerned that children were not learning to read, they were only learning to memorize. So my
mm,
illustrations paired with very simple basic text was either Farsi or Pashtun. I can't remember because I didn't read either one, but I was familiar some with the auditory language in these simple stories that became part of the, I guess, compendium in local schools. And so that was amazing.
at such a young age, being able to travel and securing that job, and as children memorizing things, they don't have the context or the comprehension of what's being said,
That's
whereas
right.
the visual almost can open up much more of a
Yes.
world, if you like, for them to immerse
Yeah.
themselves in, go in and get meaning from.
Yes,
So
that's right.
yeah, a very meaningful project to you in
Very much.
creating meaning, but then also in solidifying that meaning for the children. Yeah, fabulous. I
Yeah.
didn't ask you what your favourite children's book was, actually. So we talked about Wind in the
Oh,
Willows being more
no, I
recent
have
and the
another
project
one.
there. So,
It was an American book called Ferdinand the Bull. It may have originally been in Spanish, and later I did become a Spanish speaker and still am. My parents had well, in those days we called them record players and long playing discs. They were large, not the little ones, and not CD types.
That's so big.
Yes.
Mm.
Uh-huh. And this man's voice was so enchanting, the way he told the story. And when he would describe Ferdinand's, little activities and things, whether he was fooling around with his pals or he was sitting in a field smelling the flowers, it just became part of my love. I just absolutely loved Ferdinand, and I could picture him in this field with flowers. And one day, the big guns from Madrid came and they were looking for young bulls to put into the bull ring, to be picadored. And at that moment, of course, as fate would have it, a bee stung him and he went wild. And so these Madrid guys saw this young bull and were like, oh my God, he'll be amazing in the bull ring. Well, now on what he was interested in, and when these women were throwing flowers into the ring, he would just sit down and smell the flowers. Anyway, he got out of the bull ring and went back to the meadows. And why did I love it? I loved it because he found his own way, even though all of his pals wanted to fight and, do the thing with their horns and all that. He just wanted to enjoy nature. And so he went against the crowd, right, and found his own pathway into beauty and pleasure. And I think that's kind of what I've done.
And I think that's what a lot of people want to do. But
Yeah.
they are carried quite a lot with socially, culturally, what they think is acceptable and what is the norm, and
Yes.
peer
Yeah.
pressure and all of that kind of thing. I mean, as you started talking about the book, it reminded me of Paddington Bear.
Oh,
Because he
yes.
was always a little bit, found himself in mischief at the fight, like saw the smaller things in life and appreciated the
Hmm.
smaller things in
Yeah.
life. A little bit like, I suppose, Winnie the Pooh could be
Yes.
another one. So,
Yeah.
yeah, all of these stories, they're very simple messages, really, aren't they? But I think you
Yes.
lose them sometimes. It's nice to go back
Yeah.
to children's stories in adulthood.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just going to share all of these in the show notes anyway, so that people can
Okay.
look them up and also enjoy them. So if I could come to the journaling side of writing, Evie, um, what does your journaling practice look like? And can you remember the first time that you journaled, whether that was with a pen or a pencil in the written word or something visual?
I was given a blue leather diary that had little gold filigrees on it, and it had a little clasp with a tiny, tiny key that you could lock. And how old was I? I don't know. I might have been 10. And so that was my first experience with journaling. And of course, I mean, it was all the things a 10-year-old would think about, and I don't know. I was interested in boys quite a bit because they seemed so different from girls. But then I had my girl crowd, and we played ball together and went to the movies together and did all these things. I think it was mostly about my daily life. I don't still have that journal, but I have a very visual memory of that journal. And then in high school, I started writing poetry, and I went to a girls' boarding school that was run by Dominican nuns in California, and they were pretty tough academically and psychologically. Not the most understanding of teenage girls' angst and wishes and, all that complex stuff. But I started writing a little bit of poetry, and I remember being published in an anthology. Yeah. And what was my poem about? It was about death. So I guess I was already thinking about it. It was about flowers in a field and how they faded and died and went back into the ground. It might have been my earliest poem. Then, I mean, having to write academic papers, things that weren't that interesting to me. I was really interested in words. I loved words and their meanings. And I remember when I was maybe about 11, I saw this ad in a dictionary for this book that took words apart and told you what languages they came from
Oh, yeah.
and told you a story about them. Like I remember one was the word tantalize. And it came from Greek mythology, from this king called Tantalus, who had to do this thing all the time. He had to shove a heavy rock up a mountain. And then just before it got to the top, the rock would tumble down to the bottom, and that was his fate forever. So I thought, wow, that's amazing. Every good word has a story behind it. And that, I think that was how I fell into just loving words. And it turned out my son, Brad, who's now in his 40s, went to the National Spelling Bee in the United States 2 years in a row. And so we did a lot of word study, rehearsal. What are the roots of it? Where does it come from? How is it put together? Analyzing all that. And that was just like so much fun for me because I already loved words, and I think he did too. Then, yeah, so most of my writing after that was really, it was just college stuff, papers and all of that. So I have boxes and boxes and boxes of my adult journals that I kept over the years, and I journaled all through my travels from Portugal across Europe into Turkey and Cyprus and, Israel and all those countries in between. I was teeny tiny writing, which is not my normal. And I still have some of those journals with great detail about, especially Afghanistan, a lot of detail, because my travel partner and I lived there for half a year because he got deathly ill from foodborne hepatitis, and I could have gone on without him, but it seemed like he really needed care. So it ended up being one of the richest times in my travels. This was before the Taliban, before the Russian invasion. It was where if you saw women on the street, they would either be in Purda, completely covered with a little net, or they would be very modern looking young women in short skirts with heels on going to the university to study, right? That was the atmosphere then. And the hospitality of the Afghan people, it was absolutely remarkable to me. Never experienced anything quite like that. So it became a very, very rich experience. And we managed to travel on top of buses with chickens and sheep and whatever, and going to these amazing sites like this World Heritage site called Bamiyan with 50-meter high Buddhas carved into the mountainside and little cave tunnels where the monks lived, and many wall murals of themes from the Buddha's life. Spent a lot of time there, sat on the Buddha's head and looked out over the valley, the Bamiyan Valley. It was very, very meaningful. And here's how I wove art, I guess, into that experience. When the Taliban came and bombed and destroyed those sites, it took them a couple weeks to plant enough dynamite to end these incredibly beautiful structures. I felt viscerally sick. I had so much geographic love and memory about the culture and the people that honestly I could barely stand up. So I did a whole piece on, I called it geographic loss. So this gets into grief and loss and the forms that it takes. You don't usually think about geography, but you think about your childhood and maybe a friend leaves your neighborhood, or you have to move to a new state or out of the country because of your parents, right? These places that we leave behind become places that were so rooted in us, and maybe we never really had a chance to mourn them. So with that piece, I discovered something really important about the grief and loss process, which is that grief can strike us about any topic.
It's fascinating to hear about your experiences and your journeys, and it's wonderful that you documented that in your journals so that they can live on. Have you ever thought about doing a little memoir, or have you done anything like that?
I've done a memoir, but it is unpublished. I went to Ireland twice to study with a woman that coached me through the memoir process. And so I went twice, actually completed the memoir, but what I realized with a little bit of feedback from several people whose writing I liked, it really needs heavy editing. And in my current life, I may have told you I'm the president of a nonprofit here called Mayher Archive Collective in Western North Carolina. And it's aligned and connected with my spiritual teacher, Meher Baba. So many of my days are spent like this on a Zoom session with people that I work with every day, trying to manage the affairs of this organization, which it has an international reach. You never know what the day is going to bring. I think I've got a day to, I don't know, just read. And then it's like, no, there's something in the mix here that needs my attention.
As you were describing, going back to, you were talking about the book that you found with those words in there and the origin of those words.
Oh,
And
yeah.
now I find that I haven't found a book as such, but I think I shall go and have a look for one now. But I'm always fascinated when I hear or I read something about where the origin of a word came from. I mean, tantalizing. I was visualizing the Greek god pushing that up, and I was thinking, is it
Yes.
pushing up the tantalizing process? Is it when it comes back down? It's the tantalizing.
Yes. What is that
That
push and pull, right?
is it the process or so? Yeah, I find that absolutely fascinating. And to me, what I'm hearing as you describing that is almost the foundations. Probably when you were with the lady,
Our so-called housekeeper.
house, yeah, probably your curiosity started then, but certainly that book
Yes.
really brought out that curiosity from you too. Not just accept something as is, but well,
Yeah.
where did that come from? Or going beyond the word, which I think I might have
Mhm.
mentioned in one of the questions actually, when did you realize that there was something more actually beyond that word?
Mhm.
And I think that a lot of people, they just take things as they are. You know, they'll read something, they'll hear something, they'll be told something, be it a process or an idea, and just, yeah, that's it. And it's just very accepting. Whereas there's so much more. Get curious about it, see, ask
Mhm.
some questions and see where that journey will take you. And from everything, all of your travels and where you've been to and who you've been with, that really comes, it flourishes from you.
Yeah, we used to, I had a younger brother. My parents called him the caboose. He was the last of five. I was the fourth of five. And he was my steady playmate all through childhood. So he and I crafted plays and wrote stories and acted out things that we thought were interesting, and couples having fights and figuring them out, or old people having whatever it was. It was like endless play. And sometimes when my parents were away, she would say, so today is costume day, so you have to come in a costume to dinner, and who are you going to be? Right. So it was woven into our childhood,
Yeah.
that the power of imagination.
Mm.
People say to me, oh, you've got such a wild imagination. I said, well, I've been told that a time or two in my life before. Probably true.
Yeah, well, yeah, your imagination can take you absolutely anywhere. You
Yeah.
know that the limits are if you have no imagination, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and you become a
Yeah.
little bit stuck, possibly,
Yeah.
which you most certainly haven't.
Well, sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about your journey, your journals, how you got into the journaling. Where did the sort of, the marriage and the grief and the end of life come into
Yeah.
play? I mean, you've already explained a couple of tragedies that you've had in your own life, but
Yeah.
where did that sort of path, where did that crossroads come?
That's a great question. There's a saying, I know you've heard it a time or two, or probably many, many times, but there was a story. I don't know if you know the name Rachel Naomi Remen. She was an MD,
Mm.
lived in the Bay Area in California, and she worked with cancer patients, and she was just a wonderful storyteller. And in her book called Kitchen Table Wisdom, which is a beautiful book, there's a story about a young man that she treated who had been, I think, a football player at Stanford, and he developed cancer in his leg and had to have a leg amputated. And he was incredibly bitter about it. And he'd come into sessions with her and very resistant and just angry, angry, angry. And over time, they developed a relationship, and she would invite him to make a drawing of something. So on one occasion earlier on, he drew a vase with a big crack in it, black and,
Hmm.
dark. And at the end of his treatment, she pulled out all of his old drawings and pulled out this one of this vase with the crack in it. And he said, that drawing is not quite finished. And she said, okay, here, why don't you finish it? So he took a yellow crayon and put yellow light all through that cracked place that had been dark. And I think he said, that's where the light comes through.
Yeah.
So I think our fractured and wounded places lead us to things that will ultimately matter. And, my complete shattering at my father's death and the risk taking that I took on this journey, there were many that I took. And I'm throwing it all into this journey. It doesn't matter where it takes me. It doesn't matter how dangerous it is, what that edge is. I don't know the edge. I'm just going to keep going, taking the first step instead of the second,
Yeah.
Anna, from a poem that we're both familiar with. And out of that desperation, and I think this is how I got into the work on grief and loss. I mean, I don't think that, there are terrible other griefs, so I'm not comparing, but to lose a family member to suicide, it's one of the most terrible for the survivor because you're just left with endless questions.
Yeah.
And it took me many years to resolve that trauma with my father, the feeling that he'd given up and abandoned me. And I was closer to him than my siblings were. They avoided him. And I loved my father because he would teach me things and taught me how to play chess. And on one of my earliest driving experiences, we'd go out into the country in his car or truck and drive on the canal banks when my foot couldn't even reach the pedal. So, lots of memories like that. What I came to, this was years and years in the making. And this message is really for people who grieve. It has no time. It has no time. And I could tell you many stories about how it just keeps unfolding and unfolding, and you think you've landed on solid ground, but nope, there's more there. I realized much later after Meher Baba found me, my teacher, really it was my desperation around my father's death that led me to my spiritual path. And without that shattering, I don't think I wouldn't have had the motivation to look as hard as I did.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it takes a real
A real shock.
yeah, for you to start questioning things or see the fact
Yeah.
that there's some purpose that you have on this earth. Yeah, a path forward, and then
Yeah.
bringing in that curiosity again, seeking those answers, and a lot of
Mhm.
questions lead you to something else. And I
That's right.
suppose, yeah, you say that grief, it's that there is no end, and I suppose different things in different places at different times have different triggers, or maybe have memories about other things. And yeah, but it's wonderful to see your journey, hear your journey, and see how you've invested in yourself and other people and supporting
Mhm.
other people through
Mhm.
through the art, the journaling.
Yeah, I think ultimately I studied family therapy because I thought, well, I certainly can't fix my family, but maybe I could help some other people, right?
Yeah.
Repair theirs. So there's the work of a grief therapist. He's very well known in the field. He's very, very elderly. I don't think he's died yet. His name was William Warden. And he talked about this is not like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross stages and all that business, which I'm not that thrilled about how prescriptive that work has gotten, although she did beautiful work for the world, I think, in opening death up as a topic of exploration and significance. But his stages and his fourth stage, I think, is quite incredible. So, first is accepting the reality of the loss. And I used to do death notification in the emergency room. And this is somebody comes in with the family member. I remember one situation a couple had gone out fishing along a canal bank. They were retired and enjoying themselves, and he fell into the aqueduct and drowned. And I think he had already died by the time they got to the emergency room. And I remember always standing with her, and just the rule I followed in the emergency room is that people are in such shock and like, what am I doing here? It's like walking into a Salvador Dali painting that makes no rational sense, right? You're just like, what is this melting clock? What's that weird thing over there? That animal's in the air hanging down. And so it requires like a lot of gentleness and repetition for somebody to get it. And, even we used to do the rule of three, right? You have to say it 3 different ways for somebody just to begin to get an inkling that this thing has happened, because it's very unreal. And I think that if you ask anybody who's had somebody die that they have loved or adored, a year later, they're dialing up their beloved, right? They forgot for the moment that, the person is no longer on the planet. And so it comes in waves. These realities come in waves. And so accepting that reality is a long process. And second stage is to experience the pain of grief. Well, that's rough. Nobody wants to go there. It's horrible. And, I always tell people, go seek your own time. Don't tell people they're just going to go, what? You're still grieving? Really? I mean, you got to get on with your life, right? Because that's another injury to an already wounded heart. So the pain of that grief can go on for decades, really. It comes and goes. Sometimes it's a giant tsunami, and like a Hokusai painting, that big tsunami wave. Sometimes it's just a little trickle on the shore that spills over your feet, But that pain has to be experienced, really. And then in that, there comes an adjustment to a world without the person in it. But again, these threads come in and we want to call them up, right? But the last stage is, I think, of great significance, and that is this, because I think our human capacity to have a desire for wholeness, it's ever present, even when we're the most wounded. I mean, I work with combat veterans, and I'll tell you, these guys taught me so much about survival, connection, risk-taking, self-expression, and the difficulty of not believing the old stories about what had happened in battle that they couldn't get over. And coming to something different. So it's finding an enduring connection with that person or place, right? Or pet or friend or whomever that, one has lost. And how do we find an enduring connection? We have to go back into our imaginations to be able to do that and remember, right? What is it that we remember? So the power of our imagination and our capacity to remember, and memory's unreliable. Does it matter if it's accurate when you're pulling it back and trying to do something creative with it? Doesn't matter, right? When my family and I, my siblings and I, my remaining siblings get together to talk about, hey, do you remember when that happened? Or, yeah, here's what I remember. And the temptation to say, that's not how it happened. Here's how it happened, right? But every family member going to have a different story, because who was first in the family of 5 is going to have a completely different story than who was 5th in the family of 5 children, right? And I've seen that repeatedly in families. It's not to fight about the version of reality that we are sure is right. It's to listen, right? To listen and understand that each person in that, whatever happened, right, will have a different perspective. And I used to do critical incident debriefing. I did a lot of work in New York City after 9/11. I'll tell you, people's memories of what happened that day vastly differ right? Because every person had a different position they were in. Maybe they watched somebody's death, maybe they didn't, maybe they got down the stairs, but maybe their office mate didn't. Every story is going to be completely unique. And I think that has to really be respected. And that's the beauty of characters in writing, right? That these characters come in and they, like Wind in the Willows, these characters are there and they have distinctive personalities, right? One's like a super helper, and Badger wants to be by himself, and Toad is a little bit like our current politics. He just wants to be Mr. Special, and it doesn't matter what he's doing, he's going to do it no matter who's in danger, right? And so these characters are like our inner voices, and these inner voices have very distinctive aspects of them. We have parts of us who are horribly wounded and traumatized, and parts that no matter what, I'm gonna go forward, and parts that sit on a fence and get splinters because they don't know how to make a decision, right? Like all of this whole cast of characters is part of each of our psyches. And I have a friend who's a poet, a wonderful, wonderful friend. And I'm not sure she ever went into therapy. She's like, no, fiction's my therapy. I have read so many characters and I love how how these characters solve their human problems. Right. So there's literature therapy, which is, I just loved when she said that because that hadn't been my path.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah, we're all different, like you say. We've all got those different. Do you think it helps for people that have, you were just describing there, yourself and your siblings, and there being five of you. But do you think it helps in that group setting where people have been through the same traumatic experience, whatever that might be, or they're grieving in some way? Do you think it helps for them to hear other people's perspectives? Yeah.
Yeah. In critical incident debriefing, the strategy generally is you don't want to re-traumatize people that were there, right? But you want people to have the room to tell their stories. And so what happens in a group, if there's enough safety, is that as each person talks about their reality of the traumatic situation, the psyche gets a little wider, a little wider, a little wider, a little wider until the narrator, let's say, right? The narrator is the one that's got the whole picture of what's going on. So when people, oh, you were over there, wow, then we can begin to dimensionally enlarge our internal perspective of that experience. And as Jung said, we are not wounded by ourselves, and we don't heal alone either. We need the voice of the group, whoever the group is, whether the group is a wonderful therapist who works well with a traumatized client, or whether the group is a best friend over tea repeatedly for a couple of years, or whether it's a grief group. I know working with veterans, they've got to be in groups because I recognized early on in my work with them, I mean, I'd never been in combat, right? I was never trained as a soldier, although I lived on a kibbutz that got shelled and had bomb shelters. But, I wasn't a soldier carrying a gun. I was somebody working and living on the kibbutz. It can be really frightening. And when we get together to share our experience of something that happened, we can begin to mend. And I remember early on working with veterans one day, I'm the only art therapy person in the room and a bunch of guys. And they've all been I worked with Vietnam veterans, Iraq, Afghanistan, even Korea. So they had different generational, very different experiences. And they looked at me one day and like, what makes you think, what are you doing in this room? Like, what do you know about us? And I was like, I mean, if you could have seen my face, I hope I didn't go, no, what do I do? So I took a breath and I said, well, I've never been in combat. I have friends that died in Vietnam, and I have found their names on the wall in Washington, D.C. And those were personal tragedies to me because I also knew their families and we were friends. But I have not been in combat. I am looking to you guys to help me understand what that experience is like. I'm not the expert here. I'm here to facilitate and to keep the group safe and to have you help me understand what I need to do to be with you. Then they were like, all right, I guess she's cool. So once I had admitted my complete ignorance, and I mean, I was experientially ignorant, but then when they see that you're not going to tell them what to do, that you're not the expert who's read, 5,000 research articles about treating veteran trauma, and you go in there with beginner's mind because you don't know what's going to show up, then they'll make a space for you. And what I saw in groups was all I did was hold the space, and what they did was they helped each other.
Yeah.
Because someone would hold up a drawing and he wouldn't tell the story, but it was pretty clear, right? He lost a friend in that explosion. Some guy across the table from him, all he would do, he'd just look at the guy and he'd go, I get it, man. I get it. And that was the healing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, is there any particular images that perhaps stood out from that? I mean, it's their way of expressing it and it meant something to the other people that were in the room. Is there anything that really stood out for you?
You mean their imagery? Yeah, I mean, I was trying not to be too explicit just because the content is very raw. It's such
Right.
raw
Yeah.
to lose a friend in an explosion. And that was what was depicted. The moment
Right.
what happened to his friend. And he had no words for it. Sometimes images versus words, but they really go together. Sometimes the image has the potency, the power, the expression in it, say much more than any bunch of words on a page can do.
Yeah.
But I do believe in the blend. I think the blend is powerful. And back to writing and this blend between visual art therapy, and expressive writing, to me, that combination packs the biggest punch. Because what I might do with that guy that I was telling you about, his image, and I never forgot that moment, this other man across the room just saying something so healing to him, so moving. I always ask people at the end of that, I wonder if you could let this picture title itself. Right? Sometimes I'll invite somebody, ask the picture what its name is, but sometimes the person that's done the piece needs to name it themselves. So I might just say, I wonder what the title of this piece of art would be. And what that does, if you think of anything you've ever had to give a name to, whether it's a pet or, a paper you're writing or a piece of poetry, it requires a different kind of engagement with the self, because when we shift from image making to word writing, we move from the imagery rich part of the brain to the part that pulls words and text together and makes something coherent. So we need both of them, right? So the art imagery is very expressive, but there might, what's that piece of art about? Tell me about that. And I've learned in my art shows, I don't want to tell people what my art is about. I want them to tell me, because they're going to tell me something I haven't seen. But when somebody creates something and they have to puzzle over, what is the title of that thing? And they come up with something, those words and that image cohere, and it becomes a whole something. So my practice, and I'm very undisciplined as a journal writer. I could spend all day writing about something and creating artwork, and then I could go several weeks and write nothing. Or I'll find a snippet of poetry and put it in the journal and then create art around it, and then ask the artwork what it has to tell me. What does it need me to know? So this whole process that I'm describing to you really fits into what Jung called active imagination. And that is when let's see. Well, there's two approaches to art, right? You're in an art school, and I'm currently taking an advanced printmaking class at the university here. So I'm with 21 and 22-year-olds, which I absolutely love. And they're busy making art, and they put that aside, and they make the next one and the next one and the next one. And I'm working on a lithograph for 5 weeks. And I want to stop at each stage and talk to it. And so they don't know I'm doing that because they might be like, really? You do that? So there's, art making when you're just busy getting it on the wall or getting it into a show. And then there's reflective art making, which to me as an art therapist, it has the deepest value of all because everything that comes from us has some kind of meaning. It may be scratching the surface, superficial, but it may not be. It may be like being an archaeologist and excavating underneath the surface of something. And so, and it came from you, and that gives it a sacredness and a personal identity that matters to pay attention to. And so you can conversationally engage with a piece of art, or you can do it in writing, have a dialogue between two parts of you that are struggling with something. But I think the urge is always there, no matter who we are, doesn't matter what we believe, doesn't matter what we call it. The power of creativity it's a movement into an ocean, I think. Maybe it starts with a spring and it has a little movement and it goes into the river and the river gathers force and then eventually it spills into one of those beautiful oceans around the planet. And out of that ocean comes a much larger experience of the self.
Yeah. I love the way that you've described that. You have throughout this conversation, you've described a lot of things metaphorically, very visually. I'm thinking about so when I say first met you, but it was more of I came as a student on Kay Adams's Inspirations, which was the 40-year anniversary of Journal to the Self, as you know, and she runs the Centre for Journal Therapy. And the session that you delivered on that course was very different to anything that I've ever done before. You had us drawing around our feet.
I did, taking shoes off.
Taking our shoes off, which I think there was a lot of people were like, oh, how are we going with this?
I know.
And I'm just looking at mine here. I'm just going to hold it up to the camera for those people
Oh,
that are
good.
watching. Actually, this was my foot there. You can see that.
Yes, wonderful.
Um, yeah, and based on all your prompts, I've got the ocean there and the trees there.
Mhm.
And I named this Desire. So, yeah, and I was quite interested in when I drew initially around my foot, my pen sort of faltered at one point, and I zoned in on that. And I think I might have in an email exchange explained this. I did in a past life, this life, but a past career was a reflexologist. And so I was
Oh,
fascinated at
really?
what
Oh, wow.
point it was that I stopped, and there was the bladder and then
Oh, the
another bit which
planet.
was the
Interesting.
tailbone, and I
So
struggled to.
filtering and cleansing.
Yes, well, I
Hmm.
hadn't thought about that angle, but yes, exactly. But I did have a problem with my tailbone when I was quite a bit younger, and I do have back trouble every so often, so it may stem from that there. But yeah, I found that fascinating because I suppose whether you start with drawing something, the visual aspect, and I guess that could just be collage of photographs and things. It doesn't necessarily have to be a
Absolutely.
free drawing,
Yeah.
or whether you start with the words. It is all coming from you, like you say, it's all part of you, and that's worth listening to because there's meaning there that you may not yet understand. That you need to perhaps, as you say, dig a little bit further to see what comes of that. But
Right.
yeah, and any of these sort of therapies, these art therapies, bibliotherapy, poetry, that they're all connecting to us in some way, whichever form we choose. So yeah, I find it fascinating.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
wonderful that to look back at that and see it and hear your comments about it and to notice, right? I mean, from your story, the fact that you were a reflexologist before you started really getting into the writing process, we carry those things with us. I
Mm,
think anything we've ever learned about anything it's part of the strand, and they get over time, they get woven together. And you had the intuitive knowing that, oh, look where it got a little stuck there. I think I need to pay attention to that. And what you
Mm.
did was you noticed where it was. You drew on your background knowledge of reflexology to identify what the point was. And that gave you more depth about where you might take the work. I think that's a beautiful example of how those two work to how those two parts of us, how they can collaborate with each other. I don't think anything is really ever wasted.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think there's also that quite often we look forward, we try to look forward, walk forward, see where we're going. We
Yeah.
set all these goals. Whereas there's a lot in the past. And I'm not saying, digress to the past because I don't always think that that's a good thing where we kind of relive certain things. But certainly your past has just as much value as your future, your past self, your future self. And I'd not really thought about, me delving back on that experience and that knowledge and relating that to
Yeah.
my visual art there.
Yes.
I'm going to call it
Yes.
art. I wouldn't say it was art, but it is my art.
It is your
Um,
art.
yeah, and how that all relates together. And yeah, I'm fascinated with the different parts of ourself and which part is in more
Yeah.
control, which has the driving seat at different points in our
Yeah.
life. And I think doing writing, doing the journaling, art therapy, whatever it is that we choose to do, is just a way of maybe some of those more suppressed parts, shall we say, of
Yeah.
allowing them
That's
to
right.
have their say.
That's right. That's a really good, beautiful point, actually. And what it makes me think about is the whole idea of parts of ourselves and how every day we wake up and there might be an internal conflict. Oh, I'd rather stay in bed in these warm flannel sheets than get up and go to work. Right? And that's a common one for people that are still at that stage of life where they have to go someplace to work or get up and work from home like people did during the pandemic. But the place to really look, I think, is to look at those resistances and mine them, right? Dig out your archaeology tools because you don't know what layer is under what layer and what is going to emerge. It might be a beautiful amethyst 16
Mm,
feet under the ground, right?
yeah.
It might be a gift, a treasure, a blessing, something we've forgotten about, or it might be something terrifying, right?
Mm,
Like an old memory. And I think the way to engage that is a little bit back to winter here and just burrowing under my blankets and making a nest. I think the best way to work with ourselves and all of our parts, it has to do with being gentle with the resistances. You
mm.
don't push hard on them. I mean, I do a lot of body work for my own learning, and I have one place in my left shoulder under the shoulder blade that is mostly hurts a lot, sometimes a little, sometimes it yells, sometimes it whispers, but it doesn't seem to go away. And it requires so much patience and so much gentleness. And the attitude that's most helpful is it will emerge, right, in time. And so the work on the resistance is like, I just want to crack through it. I'm going to take a
Yeah.
chisel, just bam. But when we treat ourselves that way, it's actually a violent move against the psyche. And if we can find a nest inside ourselves, a safe, comfortable place from which we can emerge and experience, the psyche prefers that.
Yeah.
And we can move with it more. So for somebody, let's say that I know one of the things you were asking, well, what if somebody's not done this work before? Or maybe I used to write, but I can't stand even picking up a pen now. I'll tell you a super brief story. So I've been on pilgrimage many times to my beloved teacher's tomb. It's called a samadhi, and it's a place of utter quiet. And it's got beautiful murals inside, and there's no talking in there. People do all kinds of things in there, just sit quietly, breathe, whatever. But for me, I have an intuitive voice that emerges for me that I feel comes from that source of wisdom. And there I was going, all I'm doing is dry academic writing. I just feel I'm living in a desert and this is awful and I want to be more creative and I'm not, and blah, 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 on and on. that voice, bup, 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 just
Yeah.
chattering away. And I get my intuitive voice is often auditory. So even though my teacher was silent, and he died a good number of years ago, I get an intuitive voice inside myself to lead me forward. And the voice was very, not authoritarian, but very authoritative. And he looked at me, took his finger like this, and said, "Pick up your pen."
Ah.
That simple. But what did
Mm.
my pen mean? It meant so many different things. And I got it. I mean, I got that I was just feeling really sorry for myself. Meow, 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 meow. And that voice is there. It's fine. But I was kind of stuck on the record there, right? I couldn't get off of that little groove. And when I heard that inside myself, and there was this movement, this energetic movement from him to me, I started crying,
Yeah.
right? Because it just spoke to my heart
Mm.
so clearly. And as soon as I got home, of course, I'm like, okay, I got my pen, yeah, I'm picking it up, but what am I going to write about? I don't see any opportunities. The very next day, across my electronic communications, which I had a lot of those in my academic days, here comes one with a writing invitation for a book for people who had made this journey pilgrimage to India to experience their relationship with Mayor Baba. And it was going to go into a book. And it turned out, so I connected with this person who she lived in Asheville, right, which is where I live now. And she was a poet. We became good friends, and she started inviting me to come and visit them. And that is actually how I ended up moving. It's one of the reasons I ended up moving to Asheville was pick up your pen, looking to write, finding an opportunity, meeting this amazing person who just sort of opened this expressive door for me. And after that, I just kept remembering, okay, Evie, no more lamenting. You've done enough of that. Pick up your pen.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for somebody that's never done it, here's what I suggest. Blank paper, okay? Nothing written on it. Blank paper, simple materials. Maybe it's just a pencil. Maybe you get some oil pastels that run really soft on the page and with a broad stroke. Maybe you get some colored pens that have a brush on one side and a thin point on the other. You just scribble,
Mm.
scribble, scribble, scribble the whole page. Scribble. You don't worry about what you're making. It doesn't mean anything. No, nobody's saying it has to look good. You just scribble, scribble, scribble until you fill the whole thing up and you've gotten some muscular movement in there. And then you look, there might be an image in there that interests you.
Mm.
Outline the image and then start having a conversation with it.
Yeah.
That's such a simple way. Or, like you said, find a poem and take one line out of the poem and use it as a place to begin.
Mm.
And there are never any mistakes.
Yeah, and don't be afraid of that blank page when you come to that blank page, and yeah, just start with something
That's right.
abstract and then keep going.
Yeah,
And I think coming back to your message, pick up your pen. We just have to be open to listening to these messages, and they might be very,
right.
very much a whisper to begin with, but then they get a little bit louder and
Well,
yeah, yeah, and then just but yeah, look out for those opportunities because
that's
there
right.
will be more. It's funny that I was having a conversation with somebody just from a business colleague that I've met recently, and we ended up talking about He-Man, the Masters of the Universe, which was like a
Oh,
cartoon when I was
oh,
younger,
okay. Yeah.
and it's being made in I think it has been made into a film now. And he was saying how it was amazing that this was being made into a film now because that was the music was always his inspiration that he would latch onto, and now there's this big sort of it's almost like this year it's been announced, so this he's taking that as a sign that this year is going to be his year, all of the work that he's put together. Yeah, so I think if we just listen, turn up the volume a little bit, like you say, and then just lean in to
Yeah.
it.
Yes,
And
that's
yeah,
right.
there's no sort of
Lean
art
into whatever
police
it
grant.
is. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, So yeah, I've got loads of more questions to ask you, Evie, but we seem to have, I mean, I always
We've
find this
run
with
out
these
of
podcasts, we just run out of time. So yeah, I think if you just let us know a little bit about we've touched on quite a lot of your travels and where you've
Yeah.
worked, but also you are an artist who exhibits your work. So if we
Hmm.
could just talk a little bit about that and then maybe share what's next for you. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, my
How can
art.
people find your art, shall we say?
So I used to show my art here in Asheville, and I had pieces in the largest gallery that happened to be adjacent to the river. So all that artwork was swept down the French Broad River along with everybody else's work.
Mm.
And so I decided I wasn't gonna exhibit there anymore. So I don't currently have a venue, but I'll sometimes share. Like right now, I'm studying tango, and this person's opening a new studio, and one of my pieces may go in the studio. I might, I don't know, maybe somebody wants to buy some of my work. They probably have to come to my house. I'd make it very personal because my work is very personal. And sure, I'd be happy to sell some, but sometimes I just fall in love with my work, and it's like,
Yeah.
I think I want to be good neighbors to it. It all depends. But it absolutely informs my life. I think it's my most direct line in
Mm,
is the art making. The
mm,
movements of it, the materials. Printmaking is a marvel because it's so complex. It makes your brain work so hard. You have to reverse images. You got to scrub a stone. I mean, it's a lot of physical labor. Sometimes it's on paper, so it's transient in a way. And there's art making with others and community, and there's art making on your own. And I frankly like to do both because
yeah.
some of my 21-year-old buddies will say something about my work. And I'll be, oh my God, I never saw that before. So it can be really wonderful that way.
Yeah, very rewarding, isn't it? Whatever you decide to do from
Yeah.
an art point of view. In the
Yeah.
process, we talked a little bit about the sort of creative flow and then also the appreciation of what others see in it that you then learn from and gain from, and just
Yeah.
the satisfaction of the complete piece. Or is a piece even always complete? Because you can always add to it, you can always learn to it, it can
Yeah.
always influence something else.
Yeah, exactly. You never know where it will lead. That's the mystery of it and the beauty of it.
Yeah, yeah. And good luck with your tango lessons. That's another form of
I
expression,
need it.
isn't
I'm
it?
such a beginner. Sometimes I'm terrified to go to class. Oh no.
Yeah, that's something I would love to do. Maybe I'll have to explore that a little bit more. But I've got two left feet, so any kind of dance,
Anything
I'm
would be
not great.
good.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
start with
My
tango. Start with something else.
something that yeah, my first foot forward is normally walking or running. I'm okay at that, but
Oh,
add a
that's
little bit of
good.
rhythm into it, and it all goes to
Yeah.
pot a little bit.
Yeah. It helps to move the body. Yeah.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
what's next? What's next for you this year, Evie?
So I'm going to the International Poetry Therapy Association annual meeting in Chicago, and Kay Adams and I are going to be presenting a workshop there in April.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so that's what's most immediately next.
Perfect. And
Yeah.
how, if people want to learn more, people want to follow you, connect with you, what's I've got your website and some other links, but what's the best way for people to
Yeah, they
connect?
could use my website or just my email address. Just make it clear what you're asking for. I do some coaching and I do advanced clinical supervision for mental health professionals. So those are some of the things I do. But my time is limited because I run this nonprofit now.
Yes.
Forever, but it's in my immediate future.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Everything happens for a reason. We're always on the path we're meant to be, aren't we? And
Think
what is
so.
the phrase? Things happen for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. That's it.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, a reason. Yes, I like that.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
this
Well, Anne,
space.
it's been so lovely to talk with you. Thank you so much.
You're more than welcome. I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for agreeing to be.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. We'll be in touch.
Definitely. Thank you very
Okay.
much.
All right.
Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. If you'd like to continue your journaling journey with me, I hold in-person journaling circles across Staffordshire and Cheshire and a range of online workshops throughout the year. You're also warmly invited to join the Journaling Nook, my online monthly membership for £25. This includes 2 live journaling circles per month, weekly writing prompts and a monthly guest workshop. Visit writingwithpurpose.co.uk for details on all of these, including a free PDF journal planner download. All the details are also in the show notes. Thank you for listening to today's Writing with Purpose podcast. Having conversations with fellow writers or adventure enthusiasts brings 2 of my biggest loves in life together, writing and nature connection. I've been a copywriter and content creator for 23 years, but my passion is writing for well-being, and I'm on a mission to share the benefits that putting pen to paper has for personal wellness with as many people as possible. If you want to learn more about writing for your well-being and journaling techniques, please connect with me in my Facebook group, Journaling with Anna.